Celebrating 44 years on the air, Farm Week is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week, potential tax changes could keep some farmers from being able to keep the land they inherited. Plus, it's the chicken shortage that isn't. Mississippi's Ag Commissioner says there's a far bigger problem behind it. Speaking of Mississippi, in Southern gardening, we're off to Brookhaven for some springtime color. And in our feature, a tag program with roots in the fight against the pandemic. Farm Week starts right now. Hello everybody, I'm Mike Russell. Thanks for joining us today on Farm Week. Just a few days ago, the president delivered his first speech to a joint session of Congress. If you were watching, you know that Joe Biden is calling for an increase in taxes on what he calls the wealthiest of Americans, those making more than $400,000 a year. He has other plans in mind as well, some of which could impact the ag sector. Farm Week's Jonah Holland takes a deeper look.
But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share.
In his address, the president proposed sweeping changes to the federal tax code, including provisions that would affect the heirs of farmers and ranchers. The White House wants to reverse the 2017 tax cuts and proposed tax increases for America's wealthiest households. The jump in tax rates would be joined with a change in the way estates are valued. The president's plan would eliminate the step up for asset gains of more than $1 million, but would also defer estate taxes on farm, ranch, or small business assets as long as the farm or business remains family-owned. The step-up valuation has been common and has allowed generations of farm families to avoid unwieldy tax burdens on inherited land. By lowering step-up allowances, Democrats and the White House hope to target wealth in stocks, bonds, and other non-business-related assets. This carve-out for business and ag assets is an attempt to encourage investment in family-owned businesses and farms without fear that gains would be taxed when inherited. Roughly one-third of American farms operate over 90% of the nation's farmland. The size of some of those farms could trigger tax issues. The USDA released an outline of the tax increases just before the president's speech. It estimates less than 2% of farms would owe taxes on inheritance, but only on non-farm assets. The American Farm Bureau argues that maintaining step-up calculations keeps the marketplace for land liquid. It says reducing the step-up allowance would discourage land sales. Less land available means higher land prices. The president's speech was written in broad strokes. The details of his tax increases are still unknown.
My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out.
Reporting for Farm Week, I'm Jonah Holland.
Point of clarification of the president's reference to the wealthy paying their fair share of taxes. According to both the IRS and the National Taxpayers Union Foundation, the top 1% of wage earners are those who make $540,000 a year or more. Those individuals earn 21% of all income earned in the U.S., but they pay 40% of all the income taxes paid, more than the other 99% of taxpayers combined. In the news lately, a shortage of chicken, at least according to a variety of mainstream news outlets, including the Washington Post, Newsweek, and U.S. News, all of whom say American demand for chicken wings has caused prices to rise and inventories to fall. I spoke to Mississippi Ag Commissioner Andy Gibson about this shortage. Poultry is his state's top commodity. It produced sales of more than $2 billion last year. Nationwide, the figure is about $30 billion. Gibson says there are plenty of chickens in the supply chain and technically plenty of meat available. There's actually something else going on.
I think what we're seeing now is the result of two factors. One is the reopening of restaurants around a good bit of the country. And so the chicken demand there, as I saw KFC and Wingstop and others, increasing their demand. At the same time that in many states there are still restrictions on operations and meat processing plants. And everywhere in all 50 states, it is a challenge now to get workers hired to work to process meat, including chicken. So all those factors there are the increased demand and sort of a crunch on supply. We do not have a chicken shortage in this country, but some of the markets and some of the different product aspects of chicken may be in a shorter supply right now than they have been.
In that interview, Gibson refers to what he believes is the real culprit behind the shortage, and that's labor all throughout the supply chain. He made his feelings about that very clear in a recent op-ed, citing the extension of pandemic relief through September as the main factor behind the nationwide labor shortage, workers essentially being paid to stay home. He concludes his op-ed with this: if Americans in all 50 states are not soon motivated to return to work, and if the incentives not to work are not removed, we could see the temporary shortages of the COVID spring of 2020 repeat themselves in construction, manufacturing, and transportation, as well as food, production, processing, and distribution at grocery stores, restaurants, and ultimately at our dinner tables. America, let's all get back to work. I visited a local grocery store here in Starkville, Mississippi. The store manager said that so far the shortages we're seeing elsewhere in the country haven't been as dominant here, most likely because he's getting much of his inventory from local suppliers. But like Andy Gibson, he believes labor is the real issue.
So far, we have not had a shortage of chicken in this store. Now, I will say some of the restaurants are definitely running short, because I ate at one the other day and they had no chicken, but for us, it appears that there's not a massive shortage coming into this line. I know there is a labor situation that's making it hard for the packers to keep caught up with the economy opening and all the restaurants opening. The demand is definitely tremendous for sure. Once we get through with the pandemic relief, that's when I think people will be ready to come back to work. But that's going to have to wind down. Once the pandemic relief winds down, and everybody gets fully healthy. Of course, we've got to be healthy. And once the economy, all the public gets back to the good health, I think the workers will come back and be ready to go.
Stillman does admit that prices have jumped a bit, but doesn't believe those price hikes will last forever. Like many, he believes that once the economy is reopened more fully, prices will come back down to what he called a reasonable level. On the lighter side, if you just happen to have a little extra chicken in the freezer, what better way to enjoy springtime than with your grill friends outside? And how much nicer when there's a little color to enjoy. In Southern Gardening this week, we're in Brookhaven, Mississippi, a place that Gary Bachman says is hard to beat.
Springtime in Brookhaven is beautiful as the winter and spring seasons are mixing. Today, Southern Gardening is enjoying the plantings at Woodley. There's nothing more beautiful than spring scenes filled with floral spheres of snowball viburnum, Viburnum plicatum. The blooms open in mid-spring in spherical clusters of white flowers that fill my entire hand like a softball. This is a big shrub, so be sure to give it plenty of room. We're lucky to be right at the end of the Formosa azalea flowering. These large azaleas are stunning in bloom. The white azalea on the corner of the front porch is a single plant. The magenta azalea out by the garage is in its full glory alongside the honeysuckle native azalea. One of the small trees that I probably like the most are Japanese maples, Acer palmatum. These trees are brilliant with their exotic foliage in the spring and summer seasons, many with a fall blaze of crimson, orange, and yellow. Here are a couple of just plain gorgeous examples of Japanese maples. The combination of the red and green foliage next to each other are a stunning contrast. We're also lucky that there are still some late season camellias to enjoy. A beloved camellia is the Tom Perkins selection that is still producing loads of gorgeous flowers. I always enjoy a great blending of landscape plants as the seasons change. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and I'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a break right here, but stick around. Coming up in our Farm Week feature, a tactic with roots in the fight against the pandemic. It's voluntary now, but seems to be gaining popularity, an electronic ID tag system for farm animals. It's not a new idea, but livestock buyers could be in the driver's seat, motivating sellers to have more information about their animals than ever before. These days, it gives new meaning to the idea of a hot brand. That's coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
At Mississippi State University, Extension is reaching beyond the college campus and impacting adult education. We're instructing agricultural professionals on the latest trends in research and technology, inspiring communities, empowering small businesses, and promoting the growth of healthy families where youth and adults can reach their fullest potential.
The MSU Extension Service, sharing our vision for the future.
ATVs are a ton of fun for people of all ages, but these powerful machines can also be a ton of trouble if safety guidelines aren't followed. Never carry more than one person on a single ride or four-wheeler. The four-wheeler can become unstable and very dangerous. ATVs are designed for off-road use only. Never drive one on a highway or any other paved surface, and always ride the right size machine at the right speed. This message brought to you by MSU Extension 4-H.
It's a simple idea. Knowledge that transforms lives shouldn't be limited to those on a campus, but extended to any and all who want or need it, wherever they are. At Mississippi State University, we've been making that possible for more than 100 years through the MSU Extension Service. What began as an effort to extend the latest research to farmers has become something much more. Today, we're helping Mississippians from all walks of life, giving them the tools they need to build a brighter future. We're sparking the imagination of students around the state and inspiring the next generation of doctors. We're helping rural communities find their way to the internet and connect to the world at large. And we're teaching families how to lead healthier lives in ways both big and small. MSU is standing firm in its commitment to that one simple idea: extend the knowledge that transforms lives wherever they are.
Time once again for the Market Report with Zach Ashmore. This week, a little advice for producers trying to navigate a market boom. Zach?
Thanks, Mike. Markets closed Friday similar to the previous week, only this time cutting down, but only a touch. Let's take a look. Last week's only loss, cotton, as I said, down less than a cent, 0.72 cents to be exact. Last week's biggest gain, lumber up $128, but row crops were no slouch. Corn up about 40 cents. Soybeans up about 18 cents and wheat up 22.5 cents. So, what we've been seeing these past few weeks in row crops is a serious bull market. That is, prices going up and trade situations keeping it that way. That's to say, informed speculation tells us that's where they should be. The reason? Well, many, but the main one seems to be supply. Remember, the USDA grain stocks report said corn, soybeans, and wheat all down. Doesn't mean demand's gone away. Market analyst Dan Huber says the connection in grain crops has to do with feed. We've talked about that before, but there's also another factor at play.
Generally, you would associate this kind of move with a summer rally. And even then, summer rallies, 4 or 6 weeks, they're done and over with, and that's just it. But, truly, this is demand-based. Granted, it started with some supply issues, but, with China stepping into the market and, some of the production problems we ultimately found out we had last year, this has just grown and grown. Now, interestingly enough, it's been very orderly. And again, one of the main purposes of when you get into a market like this is the market has to discourage demand, help promote production, which, we've done a pretty good job there as far as the acreage. We're looking at additional acreage for corn and soybeans this year, but not up until recently have you kind of seen that panicky type of buying that would be associated with, well, we've really got to kind of squeeze the noose around the demand out there, and I wouldn't necessarily say we've got the job done yet, but at least we started the process. There's always a certain amount of people look at, well, corn's a little high priced, and beans, maybe have kind of capped off what they can do, so let's just go over and buy wheat. But certainly on a worldwide basis, beginning a few weeks ago here, the Chinese government put out official recommendations to the livestock industry and how you can rebalance rations with heavy emphasis on feeding wheat. And you're seeing that in Vietnam, you're seeing that in South Korea, some of the major, I think 23, if you take South Korea, Vietnam, and China, there's 24% of all the corn export business in the world. And if they're starting to look at alternatives to using corn or soybean meal, it's going to show up. And I think that's what's shown up in the wheat here the last week or so. So I think we're starting to back down the demand and little incentive. Why would you want to try to take the risk of expanding 6 months down the road when those markets are really still well within where we've been in the last 3 to 4 range when it comes to fall months. The one place we haven't seen it now, and granted, new crop, old crop are two different stories here this year. But one thing we haven't seen it yet is in the ethanol industry. Good margins yet, so they have all the incentive in the world to continue to grind as much corn into ethanol. And of course, the DDG market is going to remain substantial for the feed side of it. So. Not happening yet, but again, even in that industry, all it would really take would be for Saudi Arabia to maybe kind of turn up the nozzle just a little bit and start pushing a little more oil onto the world markets, and you've put a cap on that.
So how's a farmer supposed to navigate this? Well, it's important to know that bullish markets tend to have a compiling effect. That is, bullishness brings more bullishness, and the market continues to grow until it stops and bearishness takes over. What does that mean? It means the grain markets look great right now, but it won't last forever, and they'll fall again sooner rather than later. Dan Huber gives some good advice for producers looking to make a sale.
This really comes back to why you need to have a plan in mind, sit down and certainly put on paper and offers put into place. Because one, you can't your job as a producer is not to be watching the market every minute it is trading. That said, if you've done your homework, you know what it's going to cost you within reason, what production is going to be this year. You've got crop insurance in place to cover some yield losses, and if you're at the point where the return on investment is exactly what you're shooting for or within the range you're shooting for, there's no sense to not continue to sell into it, ideally on a scale-up basis. Just in the fact that when it turns, markets, just like bottoms never occur in market because the news got bullish. It's always the most bearish news when you're at the bottom and ready to turn up. Same thing on the top. It's going to peak when everything looks the most bullish. And it'll come as a surprise, and at some point we're just going to run out of the capital coming into the market. It's a little bit curious right now. For the last 2 weeks now, we've had large specs exiting the corn market, even though we've continued to push higher, which I would tend to say that might, not that they still have a massive long position in the corn market, but I think it would be indicative of saying we've probably committed as many dollars as we need to this market at this point in time, and if anything, we're starting to rebalance a little bit.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. Past few weeks pretty exciting. Supply appears to be the driving factor right now. I predict we're going to see a peak pretty soon. Have a happy Mother's Day. Back to you, Mike.
If you have anything to do with livestock, you're familiar with the concept of ear tags. They've made a big difference in day-to-day management. But the increased demand for specific genetics and disease tracking has some farmers investing in an upgrade. Here's Colleen Bradford-Krantz with more.
This newborn bull calf has been given his identification. He is now number 5 at this Winterset, Iowa farm. His number will be used to track his birth date, vaccinations, and weight as he grows. But when he is sold and leaves his home farm, many of these records will likely be left behind. 60 miles away at the JDH Wagyu farm near Villisca, Iowa, this newborn bull will be identified with a small button-like tag that includes a radio frequency transmitter. When read using a handheld wand, the radio frequency tag will reveal his nationally unique electronic identification, or EID number. His records, pulled into a spreadsheet, could easily travel with him to a new home.
From back in the day when we hot branded cattle, when the old cowboy wrestlers were out there, and we've identified cattle throughout history in different forms and fashions, and really started to incorporate electronic ID in recent years, within the last 10 to 15 years.
The 15-digit EID number would not only be associated with a birth date, birth location, and health information, but could also be shared with USDA through a database to rule out or pinpoint affected cattle in case of a serious disease outbreak.
Of the top 10 beef exporting nations in the world, only 2 of them don't have a disease traceability system in place today. That'd be us and India mainly exports water buffaloes. That does limit some of our markets there from an exporting perspective. But, even more importantly, I think, being proactive here to build a system, a tool that can be used to limit the spread of a potential disease outbreak, I think is really, really important when we look at not only our food supply, but really our livelihoods as producers.
The federal government has, in the past, planned to require the use of electronic identification tags. It announced this week it will again delay the most recent plans, but will likely return to the idea in the future. In the meantime, U.S. Cattle Trace, the Kansas-based nonprofit where Grund is executive director, is trying to establish a voluntary national system for disease traceability. Cattle producers have been concerned about the additional cost. The tags cost more than the standard ear tags, but the larger investment is in the wand and associated computer gear. That equipment can begin around $1,000 and move quickly upward.
There is also some legitimate concerns from ranchers that are afraid that having electronic IDs would just perpetuate and perhaps exacerbate their concerns over lack of competition and consolidation in kind of the cattle slaughter and processing and marketing environment.
Dr. Marty Zalewski is more focused on the benefits that EID tags provide to the nation's livestock herd.
It allows me to rule out producers and ranchers that may not be involved in a disease event. As an example, in the state of Montana, we were trying to find the source of a cow that was diagnosed with tuberculosis at slaughter. And because of the way that cattle and animals are commingled and sold, that animal came out of a feedlot where there was a possibility of 99 possible sources where that animal could have come from. But if that animal had a tag that was able to be read at slaughter and then correlated to her birth premises, you would have been able to hassle and trouble one premises instead of 99.
JDH Wagyu President Joe Hoy says although it took a little time to adjust to the EID tags, he now can't imagine getting by without the system.
As we scan it, all that information comes to our computer, has the weight on them, their tag number, and any of their previous information we've put in. It's an investment in whatever you're doing, but the cost of the machine and the wand versus spending hours of typing up information and handwriting information and not typing in the correct numbers and weights, that can be costly mistakes down the road.
Hoy raises Wagyu, a Japanese breed where verifying age, birth premise, and genetic line is particularly important to buyers. The American Wagyu Association, as well as organizations that support other breeds, retain much of this data. But the EID system allows for weight and pen locations to be added to inventory spreadsheets. Hoy points out that handwritten records can sometimes be inaccurate.
There's lots of opportunity for errors. You can't see it properly or mud or who knows what, but at the end of the day, it's much better with that electronic because it's so positive, you know exactly what you do have.
Hoy doesn't lose sleep over the fear that some producers have of being liable if their cattle are proven to be the source of an outbreak.
I think there's a little bit of grease there, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. At the end of the day, I think most producers try to do the best they can to make sure they know what they're selling. But there's always diseases that come up.
Through U.S. Cattle Trace, producers will continue to test the system and weigh the pros and the cons.
From our perspective, we're all producers, and we don't want to mandate anything upon anybody that doesn't want to participate in a program like this. You know, we want good, proactive people that are wanting to build animal disease traceability for the industry.
Always a challenge when to adopt technology versus the cost, chicken and egg. Well, next time on Farm Week, something you don't hear too much about, pain management for animals in the American food chain. Pain meds for those animals are virtually non-existent, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But experts have long sought pain relief for such animals, though getting the FDA to approve it has been complex. Research into new options is being done, though. What do they look like? Find out next time on Farm Week. And before we go, in honor of Mother's Day coming up this weekend, this is my mom. Grew up picking cotton in the Mississippi Delta, then became a model for a while. You can see why. She was a beautiful woman in every way. She's not with us anymore, but definitely not forgotten. To her and my wife Brenda, my mother-in-law Velma, my sister Sherry, my daughter Erin, all of whom are moms, happy Mother's Day. And wherever your mom is, I hope you'll hold her close and celebrate Mother's Day in your own way. In the meantime, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv. Again, happy Mother's Day. We'll see you next week.